Hi everyone, PlayDohBear here, and today we'll be going over my personal favorite endgame build for Hogwarts Legacy, which in my opinion is also one of the best builds in the game. Currently, builds in Hogwarts Legacy are not that overly complicated or has that much thought into it really, as gear is plentiful and traits do stack. This build is a curse focused build and will utilize all of our spells except Depulso, which I just don't find myself using in combat really, and if you don't want to, you really don't have to use the killing curse because the build is just that powerful. A lot of the time, I just find myself rotating my spell combos and only really use Avada Kedavra for that slow-mo finishing blow. Before we get to the rest of the video, consider giving this video a thumbs up and also hitting that subscribe button if you really want to. I also stream regularly on twitch.tv/PlayDohBear if you also want to send a follow my way there. With that out of the way, let's get started with our gear and traits. Gear is extremely simple. Use whatever has the higher offensive and defensive numbers as you play the game. We ideally want all legendary pieces as this gear type allows us to use the tier 3 traits. If you don't have access to legendaries or you're missing a few legendaries, that's fine as this build will work just as well with green, blue, and purple gear. Later in the game, we become Jeff Bezos so we can just hit up the gear shop in Hogsmeade and check what's in stock for our upgrades. Pro tip, feel free to always be upgrading your gear tiers as well. This will provide us with increased offensive and defensive stats which help with our survivability and damage. Once you unlock the room of requirement, go ahead and catch those beasts that we'll need for our gear upgrades. Later, as you progress the main story and side missions from Deke, you'll have access to the Graphorn and Phoenix for our tier 3 gear upgrades. Moving on to our traits, we will be using Unforgivable 3 in all of our pieces as traits do stack in this game. Unforgivable 3 increases our damage significantly to cursed enemies. Cursed enemies already take increased damage as that's the nature of the curse effect, and this just exemplifies that damage output. If you don't have access to the tier 3 trait, feel free to use either Unforgivable 1 or Unforgivable 2. You can find all 3 versions of this trait by clearing bandit camps and opening the chests located in each camp. If you want to cheese getting these traits a bit faster, just follow these steps. Step 1, once you clear out the bandit camp, create a manual save before you open the chest. Step 2, open the chest. If it's a trait you're not looking for, we reload our manual save and open the chest again. Since trait drops are RNG at these bandit camps, you can keep cheesing the above method to find the unforgivable or any trait not locked behind challenges you want earlier on. So why unforgivable and not other damage traits like concentration, which increases the damage of all of our damage spells, or spell-specific traits like scorching, laceration, etc.? Well, the simple fact is that the unforgivable trait just gives us the best damage numbers. A good friend of mine, Dude with a Blunt, did a bit of testing on the first troll in the bat arena for these damage numbers, and here are the results from the tier 3 variant of these traits. The test used the same gear, upgraded with traits swapped. Pretty sure he was level 35 and above for these tests. Starting with our basic attack, we see that with no traits applied, it does 30. If we do a basic attack on a cursed enemy, we have that bumped up to 32. When we then use the ambush tier 3 trait, 6 of them, on our basic attacks on cursed enemies, this damage gets increased to 89. Now remember, the ambush trait increases our damage while we are in stealth. Moving on to 6 unforgivable tier 3 traits, we see that our basic attack on a cursed enemy also does 89 damage. Moving along to a spell for this example Defendo, our basic Defendo does 459 damage. Now, if we use Defendo on a cursed enemy, the damage gets increased to 481. If we use the concentration trait, 6 of these on Defendo on a cursed enemy, this increases our damage to 808. Remember that concentration is the trait that increases our damage to all damage spells. Heading over to using 6 laceration tier 3 traits on Defendo on a cursed enemy, this increases our damage to 1114. Laceration is the trait that increases our damage to just Defendo. If we also compare this with 6 ambush traits with Defendo on a cursed enemy, this increases our damage to 1349. Now, if we just use 6 unforgivable 3 traits on Defendo on a cursed enemy, this increases our damage to 1349. Looking at our Incendio damage, our basic Incendio damage does 510. Adding 6 tier 3 scorching traits, which increases the damage of Incendio on cursed enemies, it's going to deal 1238 damage. If we use 6 unforgivables on Incendio on cursed enemies, this increases our damage to 1500. When we head over to the plant and its synergy with the unforgivable trait, this is where things get a little weird. Starting off with the venomous tentacula, the basic damage that it's going to be dealing is 153. When we use 6 of the tier 3 herbology traits, which increases damage to all of our plants, then the venomous tentacula does 841 damage. If we use the venom trait that's supposedly supposed to increase only the damage of the venomous tentacula, you can see that it's currently not working right now, as it has the same damage with or without that trait applied. When we look at the unforgivable trait for the venomous tentacula plant on a cursed enemy, it's only doing 160 damage, so 7 more than just the basic plant damage. You can see that the same applies to our cabbages. Regular cabbage, 204. When we use 6 tier 3 fangs trait, which increases our damage to our cabbages, you can see that the damage is increased from 204 to 471. However, if we take that same example and use 6 herbology traits on the cabbages, the damage gets increased to 1122, and just like previously, unforgivable on cabbages on a cursed enemy barely does any more increased damage. Taking a look at our mandrakes, the same apply here as well. Speeding through the rest of these here really quickly, a regular stealth kill does 2550 damage. If we use 6 binding tier 3 traits on a stealth kill, that's going to be 4845 damage, and using 6 unforgivables on a stealth kill with a cursed enemy is going to deal 7496 damage. For our ancient magic, our normal ancient magic damage deals 5100. If we use the increased ancient magic trait, this increases our damage to 17340, and if we use the unforgivable trait on ancient magic on a cursed enemy, this increases our damage to 15,000. For our ancient magic throw, normal one is going to deal 408 damage. Our ancient magic throw with 6 control traits are going to do 1969 damage, and our ancient magic throw with 6 unforgivable traits is going to deal 1200 damage. Moving forward to our Crucio tick damage, normally it's at 85. If we use the cruelty trait, it's going to increase our Crucio tick damage to 198, and if we use the unforgivable trait for Crucio, it's going to increase that tick rate to 239. Lastly, for Thunderbrew Potion, a regular tick is at 204 damage, and if we use the unforgivable trait, the Thunderbrew tick on cursed enemies gets increased to 600. As you can see, the unforgivable trait is just pumping out a lot more damage compared to the other traits. Just note that unforgivable and curses won't affect plant damage, and the fangs trait just doesn't work at all. I'll also have a link to this sheet in the video description down below if you want to take a closer look. Heading to our talents, we're going to be going over the core talents you'll need in each section. The rest you can choose as you please to fit your playstyle. Note that we cannot respec our talents at this time, and we will only be able to get a max of 36 out of the 48 talents. For our spells, the core talents will want our Incendio Mastery to make our Incendio into a short-range AoE nuke, Accio Mastery to pull more enemies to us to combo with Incendio. By the way, we'll be going over some of my favorite combos later in the combo section. Confringo Mastery, which spreads more fire to enemies near the initial blast, super helpful for the Infernis, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Then we're using Defendo Mastery so that our Slicer can slice more things, Bombarda Mastery to add an AoE blast to our Bombarda spell, and finally, the Transformation Mastery, which turns enemies into an explosive barrel, which you can chuck right back at the other enemies. Checking the barrel also breaks their shield, which is super helpful, and later in the combo section, I'll show you a big cheese you can do with the Transformation spell, plus curses, plus the Transformation and Blood Curse Mastery. For the rest of the talent tree here, feel free to grab the ones that fit your playstyle. For Dark Arts, we're going to want to max this tree out, but earlier on, we'll want to grab the Disarming Curse. Being able to apply a curse without access to the curse skills early on is really nice and works great with Expelliarmus. Stunning Curse so that our Stupefy will also apply a curse when launched at an enemy. Knockback Curse, which allows Fulpendo to also apply the curse status to our target. Slowing Curse, for the same reason as this applies a curse to enemies we hit with the rest of momentum. Blood Curse, which I only recommend getting once we unlock our first Unforgivable Curse in Crucio. Crucio Mastery, which launches a projectile that curses nearby enemies. Note that for Crucio to work properly, you'll want to Crucio on an enemy with higher health. As for the curse to spread, you'll need to auto-attack the enemies you curse with Crucio. With the amount of damage we do, if we do choose a low health enemy, by the time we get one auto attack in, they'll just be dead, as Crucio does do damage over time, and our auto attacks also hit like bricks with this build. I highly recommend saving a few talent points to max the rest of the talents in this tree once you get access to the Imperio and Avada Kedavra spell. The Avada Kedavra Mastery along with the Curse Sapper Mastery are great to have once you unlock all of your curses. For the core talents in our core tree, we will want to get all 3 spell knowledge talents so we can use a total of 16 spells. Having access to 16 spells for our combos and rotations is a must. Swift is also great here as it makes combat and traversal so much better as we become Sonich the Hedgehog. Grab Basic Cast Mastery to also reduce our spell cooldowns when we auto-attack enemies. Protego Absorption is also nice as successful blocks will contribute to our Ancient Magic meter. Our Ancient Magic with this build on a cursed enemy means instant one-shot death. We also want to grab Evasion Absorption for the same reason we grab Protego Absorption. For the rest of the talents in this tree, feel free to place them in at your leisure. Moving to our stealth skill tree, I avoid it entirely. Personally, I think stealth is a meme in this game, and I'd rather walk up to enemies and start blasting my spells and spell combos, as the combat in this game is very fun. And lastly, for our Room of Requirement talents, I recommend grabbing the Edurus Potion Potency, making us literally unkillable, and Maxima Potion Potency, making our damage even more insane and allowing our attacks to break shields. It's not like we needed more damage with this build, but one can never say no to more power. For the rest of the talents in this tree, once I level up a bit more, I'll most likely grab Fertilizer and Noxious if I ever want to do a plant-based build. The rest of the talents here are pretty meh and not worth putting points into. Now let's move to our spell wheels and how I have mine set up. This fits my personal playstyle, but more importantly has curse synergies in each wheel to maximize their damage thanks to our unforgivable trait. Feel free to set up your spell wheels that fit your own personal playstyle, as there is really no right or wrong here. Taking a first glance look at my spell wheel, you can see that for the most part I have all my spell damage spells into slot 1 and slot 2, my control spells in slot 3, and my force spells into slot 4. This consistency just makes it easier to manage my rotations and combos during fights. For wheel 1, we have Incendio, Expelliarmus, Transformation, and Accio. Expelliarmus is our curse application for this wheel, and then we have the oh so satisfying combo with Accio into Incendio. We also have Transformation for its utility and damage when combined with its mastery to turn enemies into exploding barrels. For wheel number 2, we have Confringo, Defendo, Arresto Momento, and Descendo. Confringo is here for those annoying Infernis and spiders, and of course provides good damage for us as well. Defendo is here and is going to be your flex spell, as we'll be using Defendo on wheel 4 primarily, more on this a bit later. I just have Defendo here as I got used to it being on wheel 2 and 4 when I was playing around earlier in the story, but you can also fit into Pulso if you want to utilize all of your spells and have no duplicates. For spells 3 and 4, we have one of my personal favorite combos in Arresto Momento and Descendo. This will always one-shot enemies that can be lifted from the ground. Arresto Momentum lifts enemies while applying a curse, then Descendo slams them to the ground. Remember, Descendo does more damage on enemies that are airborne. Pro tip, you can also cast Arresto Momentum on the last enemy in a camp or encounter and walk up to them to cast Pacificus Totalis for an instant kill. Note that this will only work on enemies that you can actually lift. For wheel number 3, we have our curse wheel with Avada Kedavra, Crucio, Leviosa, and Imperio. Let's start with Imperio. Starting fights with Imperio, then utilizing the Imperio Mastery, which allows enemies in our control to also spread curses, into Crucioing a higher HP target to spread more curses, then following with Avada Kedavra with its mastery as well will result in a huge wipe of enemies. Leviosa is kind of a flex skill for me here, but most of the time I just use it to help with my school cooldowns with the basic cast Airborne Absorption talent mastery. You can also use Leviosa to levitate multiple enemies with its mastery, then slam them to the ground with Descendo or to walls with Depulso if you prefer that as well. Pro tip, if the last remaining enemy is also Imperioed, you can walk up to them to finish them off with a Pacificus Totalis. Another pro tip is when you use any of your curse spells in Avada Kedavra, Imperio, and Crucio, it will automatically break enemy shields. An added bonus is when you use your Crucio with the Crucio Mastery that spreads the curses, any enemy that the curse spreads to will also break the enemy's shield. Nice. For our final wheel, we have our single target nuke setup with Bombarda, Defendo, Glacius, and Flipendo. Flipendo applies our curse to a high HP enemy target, for example, trolls. You can also use any other spell that applies curses here. It doesn't have to be Flipendo. I use Flipendo personally as it's great versus trolls and Dubog's weaknesses. Once we apply the curse with Flipendo, we follow up with Glacius, which primes our next spell to deal massive damage as enemies that are frozen receive a higher damage amount from your next attack, into Defendo, which is the highest damage dealing spell and works great with the Glacius effect, followed by a Bombarda. You'll be hard pressed to see any enemy that survives this combo, and if they do, they'll have such little HP that you can follow up with any of your spells or basic auto attacks. Just like Imperio and Arresto Momentum, but only on smaller enemy targets. If you Glacius the last remaining enemy, you can walk up to them for a Pacificus Totalis. Now this is also a good time to talk about our Ancient Magic, as this is how we can just one-shot any enemy in the game. 99% of the time, you'll need 0 setup for Ancient Magic to one-shot enemies, as it's just a strong skill in general. For the ones we aren't able to one-tap by just using the skill, i.e. trolls, apply a curse to an enemy, then use your Ancient Magic. Say goodbye to any foe that gets in your way. I also do recommend completing all of your Ancient Magic Hotspot challenge so you have 5 bars of your Ancient Magic skill. Note that Glacius does not work with Ancient Magic, at least not on trolls. The best theory is that trolls have a higher resistance to freeze, making the freeze effect die out before the Ancient Magic skill does its damage. Since Ancient Magic has a cast animation, it's likely that the freeze status is gone before it completes, or it just simply doesn't work with Ancient Magic. I didn't spend too much time testing this as it's not that important anyways, since Glacius works with our spells and basic auto attacks, and it doesn't need to work with our Ancient Magic. Alright, let's get into some of the combos I like using in this build. We can start off with the big cheese I mentioned earlier with Transformation and Curses. This one is definitely a bug and will most likely get patched. To do this cheese, you'll need the Blood Curse Mastery in the Dark Arts tree, which will share the damage taken from all cursed enemies, the Transformation Mastery in the Spells tree, which will turn enemies into exploding barrels, and the Crucio Mastery so we can spread all the curses to as many enemies as we can, and that's again in the Dark Arts tree. The steps are very simple. Crucio a high HP health enemy, hit it with a few autos, transform a cursed mob enemy into an exploding barrel, prime the barrel for a throw, and watch as all enemies just die instantly. You'll also get the added benefit of being able to use the barrel on any remaining enemies if there are any. This is pretty much your second Avada Kedavra. Moving on to the combos that aren't full of cheese, let's start with Spell Wheel 1 and Accio into Sendo. This is a combo you can use early on, and it's just as good in the late game as well. Accio an enemy and finish it off with an Incendio. Next, we can do the same combo but also add in an Expelliarmus. Accio into Expelliarmus into Incendo. This applies a curse to the enemy we pull to us and will still be in the range of Incendo for its massive damage. For a full combo for our Wheel 1, we can do something like Accio into Expelliarmus into Incendio, then turn an enemy into an exploding barrel and chuck it. Moving on to Spell Wheel 2, there's really only one combo here, and it's with Arresto Momento and Descendo. Arresto Momentum applies our curse and then Descendo slams him to the ground. Feel free to use Confringo and your flex spell here at your leisure. Remember, Confringo is really good against Infernis and Spiders. Heading to Spell 3, we have our Curse combo. Open with Imperio, into Crucio, remember to target a higher HP enemy, spread the curse into Avada Kedavra. I use Leviosa here to lift an enemy to lower my spell cooldown, but you can also combine Leviosa with Descendo or Depulso as well. For our final spell wheel, we have our single target nuke combo in Flipendo to apply the curse into Glacius followed by Defendo and Bombarda. You can use the single target damage combo with any spell that curses an enemy first. I just prefer Flipendo for the reasons I stated earlier on. Who cares about enemy weaknesses when you can just combo them out of the map? Moving on to our Ancient Magic combo, it's just 2 button presses. Apply a curse, use your Ancient Magic, enjoy one-shotting everything in the game. Note that you won't even need to apply a curse on enemies that are not trolls for the one-shot, generally speaking. Remember, these combos are just basic guidelines. Please feel free to use what works best for you. Before we head on to our tips and tricks section, I wanted to quickly showcase the Edurus Potion and Maxima Potion. With the Edurus Potion Mastery, we can just AFK, never take damage, and enjoy a hot cup of tea and biscuits. The Mastery also deflects projectile attacks back at enemies, so that's cool too, I guess. With the Maxima Potion Potency, we get a massive increase in our damage, and our attacks just casually break all shields. Here's a quick example of our damage with and without the Maxima Potion. Pretty substantial increase in damage if I do say so myself. Let's head over to our tips and tricks. Tip number 1, don't tunnel vision too much on doing XYZ combo. The build is so strong that you can just spam your spells and get by just fine. Not that the combat and enemies in Hogwarts Legacy is that difficult in the first place. Tip number 2, with that said, make sure you also utilize your curse synergies once you get a better hang and understanding of the build and its combos. Tip number 3, don't neglect your potion. The Edurus and Maxima Potion are literal cheat codes, so use them at your leisure. The Thunderbrew Potion is also really nice for some added AoE damage. If you truly want AFK, just pop an Edurus Potion with the Thunderbrew Potion. Don't also forget about the Focus Potion, as it's going to give our spell cooldowns back extremely fast. Tip number 4, do not neglect our auto attacks, as we do want to weave in some auto attacks here and there to reduce our spell cooldowns. Remember that our 4th auto attack also has increased damage. Tip number 5, while this build isn't focusing on plants at all, you'll have unlimited plants eventually, so feel free to spam your cabbages and tentaculas for additional damage. Tip number 6, get all of your Ancient Magic bars by completing the Ancient Magic Hotspot challenges. Having 5 bars of literal one-shot is poggers. Tip number 7, make sure to keep an eye out on opportunities to block attacks with Protego into a Stupefy. Or, if you're like me, just dodge roll everywhere and completely forget that Protego is a thing. Tip number 8, use your Ancient Magic throw on items on the ground as an animation cancel break. You are immune in this state, so it's really nice to do when an enemy is about to smack you. Tip number 9, the same immunity state applies when you use the curse spells in Avada Kedavra, Crucio, and Imperio. Tip number 10, the same immunity again also applies when you cast your Ancient Magic. Tip number 11, you can also grab and throw goblin arrows without needing any special talent. If you see a goblin arrow flying at you, grab it out of the air and chuck it to an enemy. Tip number 12, keep in mind enemies' weaknesses. You can find out what enemies are weak against in your enemies collection tab. Tip number 13, always be putting on better pieces of gear and upgrading them as you find them. Tip number 14, make sure to also visit the gear shop in Hogsmeade for potential upgrades. And finally, tip number 15, just have fun. You can't go wrong with any build really in this game, so go out there and wave your wands to your heart's content. That's it for this build guide, everyone, and as always, I tried to keep it short, but somehow it ended up being around 20 minutes anyways. For those that stuck around to the end, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it. I may have some other Hogwarts videos planned depending on my schedule, so make sure you consider hitting that subscribe button for more Hogwarts Legacy content. If there is any specific video you guys want me to cover, let me know in the comments below. I also stream regularly on twitch.tv/PlayDohBear if you also want to send a follow my way there. Thanks again, and until the next one, peace.